Time to stop watching any of those GTA trailers and get on the Blunderbuss for week 7. Let's look at the battle between Ash and Nathan. Knights coming versus pawns. Pawn comes in the center. I think both players are playing pretty natural moves right now. There's nothing that stands out. Just develop, bring pawns into the center. Castles. This capture does make sense because you're kind of drawing the bishop back and then putting more pressure onto the pin piece. So good vision to see that this knight could jump into that square there. Black correctly castles, and then white's jumping forward with their queen here. And whenever somebody brings their queen into your position, you've got to look for these like little sequences where you can just drive, because this knight is only defended by the queen here. You can start to drive the queen back and win the knight for free. So anytime a queen jumps into your position, just kind of just see if there's like opportunities to take advantage of that piece being in your position. Instead, we get putting pressure on the knight this way. White sets up checkmate on h7, which black shuts down. Again, directly attacking the queen would have allowed, winning the knight for free somehow. But this also, shuts down the checkmate threat. But it allows white some time to reinforce their knight in the center of the board. I like this move. I think this move of trying to open up the diagonal here makes a lot of sense. If you could take advantage of the king and this bishop being on the same line, it's always a good idea. This is a creative idea. I think the idea is if the knight gets taken, you now returning to that threat of checkmate onto the square here. It doesn't quite work tactically, but I think from a practical standpoint, it does ask black to answer some questions. We get to counterattack the queen. I think at this point, if you're white, you just go forward and trade the queens and then consolidate from here. Instead, black's leaving their queen here, opening up this diagonal, which white jumps out of the way of, which now allows that knight to be taken. The discovery actually doesn't work out, unfortunately for black. If if you had taken the queen and the check came in, jump out of the way, they take the rook, you take the new queen, and this should be too much material for black to handle. There's more to the line, but I think overall it's a good position for white to be in. But instead, and understandably, trying to get out of the pressure of those discoveries. And what black's trying to jump forward and try to put pressure here, it gets the queen out of the check here, or out of this attack here. There's not really any threat here, and I think from white you need to see, can I just go forward and continue with my ideas? There's no pressure, right, that can happen in the position because you can just end the game right away. But dropping the knight back at least attacks the queen, and opponent doesn't see it, and the queen drops off. So we get this bishop dropping back, getting out of the attack here, and black has a lot of pawns, but the extra queen should really make the difference here. We get a pawn fork, bishop gets dropped off, pawn goes forward. I think just consolidating, just getting this bishop out, you counterattack the knight. If they come forward, bring the bishop back, and you have a pretty solid position from the white side, and you've taken care of one of these dangerous pawns here. Moving forward, the move I'd be looking at here from black would be, could I drive this queen out with the knight and say the queen drops back, and then you could pick up the pawn, this way, and now you start to get this pressure, coming forward. That could be hard for white to deal with. You got discovery lined up along here. If these pawns could get more advanced, they could potentially win some material. So it's a very, regardless of what the computer says, this is a very hard position, I think, from the white side to play because of all this pressure that you have going on. Said the pawn gets dropped off. White is moving pawns forward, trying to counterattack as much as they can, and then does a good job bringing this bishop to the long diagonal, sets up a checkmate threat, which black has done a good job of seeing all of the threats coming their way. White continues to try to force open the position and just launch everything down the board. It's a good practical idea. And then brings the bishop to the side here. I think going this way, you would put a lot of pressure onto, even if this is not the best move, it's a lot of pressure onto black to handle. For example, this knight can just retreat to this seemingly safe square because you just take it off. There's a pin. No way to recapture. You probably have to find some way of reinforcing it somehow. Yeah, I don't know of any other real solutions for black at that point. Like if you move this rook, you'd be opening up the pin onto the king directly. This would be a very hard position for black to handle. Going this way allows the bishop to drop off, allows the rooks to come in with check. Now black is in control because of all the extra material that's been exchanged. But white doesn't give up, and white sets up a pretty direct threat here. If you can, you got checkmate threat here. If this rook moves, you've got mate threats with the pawn. So white's done a good job of making it as complicated as possible. And black starts to bail out and just gives repeating checks to the white king until the repetition happens. There is a way for black to win here. To say from like this position, you bring the other rook forward, which looks risky because you are leaving yourself open to these, it's not here, but you are leaving yourself open to checkmate threats. But the only square that white can really go to is here. Then you give another check. All these squares are covered. So the only path forward is to bring the king over, give another check, and then you pick up the rook or the queen in the corner here. And then at this point, this is too much material for white to deal with. Let's take a look at the game between, let me flip the board around, between Craig and Ryan. So we get English, kind of reverse Sicilian structure. And Craig goes for this fianchettoed English kind of position here. And both players have been playing pretty natural moves. There's nothing wrong either way. Putting more pressure onto the knight, and black does a good job of reinforcing it, and kind of like focusing in on these light squares is pretty much the plan from the white side right now, and sacks the rook to break open the position, removes that defender from the knight, and then recaptures here. And when you're, again, like when you're kind of getting put under pressure, your opponent's playing quickly and they're playing a lot of very direct attacking moves. You need to find, well, what's the threats that they have, and how can I play actively to counter those threats? So you don't want to play a passive defensive move if you can avoid it. You'd rather find an active one. And so right now you can see that this bishop is well defended. There's no way to take to win it. The queen and the king are currently defending it. So the real threat is the rook here. And so you have to start thinking about, well, what are the possible rook moves here? You could look at maybe bringing the rook forward, attack the bishop, or the more fun one that at least that I've saw in this position was bring the rook all the way down. And now, you kind of like flip the tables. White has been playing very aggressively and attacking, and now all of a sudden they have to be on the defensive here. This is actually a checkmate threat. If you could just take that bishop off, the white king would be checkmated here. So, they might be forced into exchanging and then dropping back to try to defend the bishop that's pinned. You could come forward, defend the rook. And if they try to get the king out of the center, it's too slow. The bishop can come forward. The castle. I think you can just force everything off. And at this point, you'll castle 2 squares, and there's no real way for this knight's hanging here. White would be under too much pressure at that point. So that's like an example of, if you find those active moves for your pieces, you can kind of like flip the attack around. Was it the hunter becomes the prey type thing? Anyway, instead, black captures the bishop, which now allows white to get what they wanted, which was winning that rook, and now white is up a piece. And this would be too much for black to handle. Very active move here, bringing the bishop out. At this point, white should just be looking at, can I exchange pieces? And from the black side, you need to find any kind of possibility to avoid exchanging those pieces. So maybe can you put pressure along here? There's ways that white can deal with all of the tactics in the position. I should probably turn on the valuation bar here. But there might be ways for white to deal with all that, but you still have to find those moves that put the most pressure on your opponent. Instead, we get the bishops get traded off. White now continues forward with their development, get their king castle. Now white is completely safe in the position. Brings the rook to the open file, so very smart play here. And then hard position from black to play at this point, but they take their queen off of the back rank, and that allows white to jump in and deliver a checkmate on the back rank there. Let's take a look at this game between Devon and Sean. You get a d-pawn game, queen's pawn game, and black's going for kind of this Pirtz setup against it. So bringing the bishop out to the side, and white setting up a lot of expansion into the center, and includes expanding on this side here. Hold on, let me turn on valuation bar, take the engine lines off. This is a little bit too much, bringing this pawn out along the side here. It's pretty weakening for the structure right now, and you're not getting any of your pieces out into the game. So black's been playing very principled chess, developed their pieces together, gotten their king castled, and now is ready to take active play in the center. And again, another pawn push here. And when your opponent's pushing these pawns like this, the way to deal with that is to find your own counter strikes particularly into the center of the board. You don't want to be looking at, pushing a pawn over here. You really want to look at either of these moves in the center, and I think either of these look good to me. First looking at the c pawn push, if there was any kind of capture here, even if you went down this line of just capturing, you bring the queen over, you check the king. Even if they try to defend it somehow and you pick up that pawn, the activity, rook, not right this second because the square is not defended, but your rook's going to come over to the center. Your pieces have squares to come out to, and you'll be able to put a lot of pressure onto white. Conversely, if you push with the e pawn, this is actually even a more direct line, I think, because if the pawn gets captured, again, you can see just like this amount of tempos lost by all these pawn moves. You actually don't even recapture. Recapturing would just allow white out by allowing them to exchange. I'd be looking at jumping forward with the knight here And now you're exposing this diagonal here. So if they capture, you bring a check, they slide over, you capture the pawn. Now the rook's coming over, skewering pieces. If they try to get the king out of the way, you bring another piece out, and you can just see like the level of activity that black's getting in the position here. So this is kind of the way to deal with a player that is pushing a lot of pawns at you, is to try to find those counter strikes where you're opening up the position, and don't even worry about whether you're gonna lose a pawn in those positions, because your activity should ultimately win out. Bringing the bishop though and forward, see now this pawn is blocked, and so you now no longer have this ability to strike forward into the position. So you're trying to develop, but in this particular scenario with these pawns forward, you need to get those counter strikes going. And now with the knight coming here, that leaves open a straightforward pawn fork. Instead, white defends the pawn, and the bishop drops back. And you can just see, like, even though it's showing an advantage for black in this position, because of white playing actively and they're trying to take space, it's actually very hard to find the right moves. The computer can navigate this, but from a human side, it's getting hard. Like, where does this knight, need to go? It now needs to retreat back, and so you're just kind of getting squeezed into your back few rows here, whereas white's now taking over the entire board, and they get active squares for all their pieces to jump to. And continues to attack. White has played a lot of pawn moves this game. They have developed one piece so far this entire game. And moves the same piece a second time, so they're only played with this bishop here, but it does attack the knight. Black is trying to find some way to, defend this knight. It does try to open up the position a little bit. And we get this exchange, which brings the bishop to an ideal diagonal. So now it's figuring out the calculations about how to take advantage of the rook in the corner here. We get an exchange of the queens. The knight is picked off, so this is a good removal of the guard tactic. Black is technically down a piece here, down the knight. But with all these pieces on the back rank, there should be a way from the black side of taking advantage of this. And the simple way is just counterattack, I think, the bishop. If the bishop drops back, you grab the rook in the corner. If they try anything like this, the rook is still trapped, so it actually doesn't help them and resolve the issue anyway. So probably have to come here, trying to get some counterattack this way, but because of the activity of black's pieces, black should be fine. Instead, the rook comes forward, tries to attack some of these central pieces, but now white is able to start bringing their pieces to more active squares, gets the rook out of the corner. This is a good idea, trying to open up the position and take advantage of this open king. This is a discovery on the rook, and then misses the discovery that was kind of outlined here. I think, like, when you see this pawn hanging, it makes sense to try to keep your pawns connected, because you could apply a lot of pressure that way. But conversely, if you see that pawn's hanging, you probably should look at both the captures that are available to you. And if you can see that this rook capture, now you got your rooks connected. That's a lot of firepower coming along this file here. And again, this king is looking very airy right now. So the rook gets dropped off, and now this becomes too much for black to deal with, because the bishop, particularly on this diagonal here, is now hemming in the king. And this bishop's also on an active square, so it's kind of like reverse that activity that could have happened if the rook landed here. Tries to pin a piece. This does vacate this diagonal, which looks a little worrisome to me. And also, white shuts it down, tries to get a counterattack, but this is too much. With this dark square bishop gone, it's going to be impossible for black to hold on to the position. And we see that, you know, white's continuing to go forward, but white's up now 2 pieces, I guess 2 knights for a couple of pawns, but the knight should win out. And even though black is trying to find ways of getting active, the pawns finally break through and pick up the piece, but get the checkmate with the pawn, which is a nice checkmate, by the way, with the pawn and the bishop covering the other square. Let's look at the game between Jared and Baxter. We get a London, pretty symmetrical structure. Both players bringing out the bishops. This one's trying to challenge the London bishop here on this diagonal here. White rocks the bishop back, hoping for an exchange where this rook would open up. Instead, black brings their bishop out to the long diagonal here. And white's got their diamond put together, got the bishop out. This is kind of an ideal London setup, but there's nothing wrong from the black side. With this bishop here, they're trying to take advantage of the extra reinforcement. I think instead I'd be looking at just advancing with the c-pawn and kind of counterattacking the structure in the center. Then you can bring your knight somewhere, you could castle, you know, bring your queen. But all the play for black seems pretty natural. And you can always jump that knight forward at a later point, as opposed to trying to do it right away. You get some natural development moves, except for this queen e2. It's probably okay. I don't see anything that there's a way to take advantage of it. I'm not sure what the plan is in the structure. The more natural square for me would be here, where you'd be putting pressure along this diagonal. Potentially you could be supporting expanding in the center. And if you were going to push the e-pawn, the queen supports from this square as well. So for me, the queen feels more natural on c2, but nothing wrong with the, I guess you could potentially reposition this way. But black's done a good job of getting pieces at counterattacking the center here, but bringing this knight out disrupts the defense of the knight that jumped into the center. And so now white's picked up a pawn, and not only picked up a pawn, but gotten a bishop into a very active central square. So we get a pawn trade, and now black pushes the pawn on the side. I think instead I'd be looking at white's left their king in the center here. And is there a way to take advantage of that position? The move that you really want to play is this e5 push. It's hard because of the control that white has on the position. So, and you know, it's giving white a big advantage right now, even because of this open king in the center here, because of all this central pressure that they have. So I'd probably be looking at, you know, maybe bringing the rook over, trying to just line some things up. You know, if you can ever get this e5 move in, that would really open things up. The other idea might be to just bring the queen over, you know, put pressure, not like that, but along this diagonal here. And, you know, you have some, you know, again, your rooks are now connected. They can swing over into the center here. The pawn push on the side just doesn't seem to help coordinate black's pieces together anymore. So white does an exchange, and then taking advantage. So even though the computer says this doesn't work out, because of black kind of playing a little bit more passively on these wings, it's allowing white to have good coordination of the pieces and to launch a direct attack on the king. King can go back into the castle here as the queen would jump forward, and there's no stopping the impending mate. So black did the right idea, which is, and this happens a lot of times in these bishop sacrifice lines, is you need to bring your king forward and start, your king has to start taking part actively in the defense of the position. Knight gets defended, queen jumps in. I think instead What I'd be looking at is rallying more defenders around the position. So ideally what you want to do is, kick this knight out if you could. Unfortunately, this pawn's hanging. So one of the first things I'd be looking at is like, can I bring this knight? If I could route this knight over to this side of the board, you'd have a lot more defenders nearby. You'd also opening up this, not like that diagonal, but you're opening up this bishop along the long diagonal here. And now it seems a lot harder for white to make inroads. They can never move forward because they just drop the knight here. Any kind of check on the side, I think you can just block it with the pawn here. And again, now you're starting to get some safety squares for your king to move to. So by bringing this knight over, you're actually adding 2 defenders to the defense of the king because the bishop is a long-range piece and this knight is getting closer into the position here. Instead, the queen jumps forward, which does limit, actually not because of this, but because of this, it does limit white's ability to castle. You can't castle here because you just drop the pawn. You can't castle this way because it's illegal. So it does try to restrict the movement some. Trying to bring the rook up, get it into the attack on one of these 2 squares. And then now the knight jumps back, which I think is a good move because it does help control the square here. And then white kicks out the queen, but also reinforces this pawn. Makes this rook look a little silly right now, but it seems like a very practical move. Queen has to drop back, and now the king's able to get out of the center here. And then this bishop dropping back. So whenever you are in these kinds of positions where black has the extra material, but they are defending, you need to find active plans. So like one of the first that comes to mind here is like, can you put this bishop here and attack the pawn? If white takes a timeout to kind of move over and defend it, like now you're getting tempos. This might not be the right move, but still you're bringing more pieces into the game here. You could be sliding a rook over. You could be finding a better square for the queen where it's not aligned with this rook. But actually, I think maybe you can just kick this knight now out of the position. And now black would be well coordinated at that point. So finding these like more active moves, maybe even just bringing the knight forward would also be more active because you're bringing a knight into the position here where it's hard for, they can't actually kick it away because you can just use tactics to defend it. So just any kind of active move here. The problem with the retreat, other than just bringing the bishop back, is it removes it from this diagonal, it disconnects the rooks from each other, which allows white to now immediately take advantage of the position, gives a check, and then cold-blooded just doesn't even go and take the free rook sitting here, goes and puts more pressure on the pinned knight. Black defends the rook at this point, but I think the more pressing matter is what's going to happen to this king. And we now see the queens now lining up against the king here, and there's really no defense in this position. Black tries to jump out of the way, but a good clearance, sacrifice, knight jumping over, threatening checkmate, and there's no defense to the incoming pieces surrounding the king, and white delivers a good checkmate here. So all of that really kind of like came about from the lack of coordination of bringing back this bishop. So when you're in these defensive positions, try to find those active defensive ideas, bringing your pieces more to the center and controlling more of the game. Standings after 7 weeks, we got Trevor still hanging out on top, 27 points, clear first, and then Funk in second place with 22. And then we have a 3-way tie for the third place for 21 points. It's really shaping up to be a good battle for these last few playoff spots for the the championship here.